In this week's episode, we talk about the holiness of money, and I draw you a heart. You see it? See the heart? It's a heart there. Hey, shalom everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Torah Tuesday. I want to remind you that we're accepting your questions. So if you have any questions for future episodes, you can ask us a question, and by commenting on the post in Facebook, YouTube, add the hashtag Torah Tuesday, and that'll help us find your questions, and we'll incorporate them either if you have a question on a specific segment or you have a question in the future that you would like us to answer. We would love to have your feedback and your participation on the show. So on this week's episode of Torah Tuesday, I want to talk a little bit about the holiness of money. That's right, the holiness of money. A lot of people do not consider money holy. A lot of people think of money as something that is dirty, a dirty object. As a matter of fact, we have the scripture in 1 Timothy, chapter 6, verse 10, which is misquoted quite a bit, where it says that for the love of money is the root of all evil. And it's misquoted a lot of times, and we say, for money is the root of all evil. And money is really not the root of all evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. So I want to talk to you about these words and how we see that money is actually a holy thing. There's only a few times in the scriptures where we see this verse, or we see this phrase that's used in the scriptures, where he says, Ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohecha, or Elohechem, sorry. He says, Daber el kol adat bnei Israel. So he says, Daber, speak, el kol adat Israel, speak to all of the congregation, all of Israel, all of the Israelites, okay, every single one of them. Ve'amarta alechem kedoshim tehiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. He's saying, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I am holy. So he's setting up the context for the next verses that are going to come forward. Just like in Leviticus 11, verse 44, we see that he says, after speaking about all the dietary laws, he gives context to everything that he just spoke, and he says, for I am a holy God. He says, be holy, for I am holy. Thereby insinuating and connecting eating clean, and how the cleanliness of the foods that we put into our body, how it affects our neshama, our soul, and that it ties into holiness. The same context is being provided just at the front here, and he's saying, speak to the entire congregation and tell them, be holy, for I am holy. And now I'm going to show you how I'm going to establish holiness amongst my people. And he starts off right off the bat, and he says, every man shall fear his mother and his father. You shall honor them. You shall observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. He's establishing things that we can do, basic things that we can do within the community of Israel, within the congregation of Israel, of how we can establish holiness. Honor your parents, honor your father and your mother, respect them, fear them, have righteous fear, honor my Shabbats, honor my Sabbaths. All right, I am the Lord, he says, your God. You shall not turn to worthless idols. So he heads straight forward and he says, don't put anything else in this world above me. Don't put anything else in the world ahead of me. He's saying, he's taken the same concept of for the love of money is the root of all evil. He's saying, don't let your love be driven by anything else. If you want things in life to go well for you, put me first. Put my Sabbath first. Honor your father and your mother. Make sure your heart is right. Do not put idols before you. Don't make any molten images. Don't go after molten deities for yourselves. He says, I am the Lord your God. He says, when you slaughter a peace offering to the Lord, you shall slaughter it for your acceptance, or in a way that is accepted, is the context of how it's written, is bring the offering, just like last week's Torah portion, Acharei Mot. We saw in Leviticus 16, verse 1, that it was after the death, right? After the death of Nadav and Abihu, Aaron's sons, they attempted to bring an offering before the Lord that he did not designate. They brought it in a manner that he did not establish, thereby telling us, making it very clear that our God is a jealous God, that he is a zealous God, and he does not share his worship, he does not share, and he's zealous about his things, about his holiness. And we learn this week's Torah portion, last week's Torah portion, that we need to bring a sacrifice in a manner that will be accepted. In other words, we can't just come before him any way that we feel like it. He has clearly defined for us, he has clearly established for us how we are supposed to worship him, how we are supposed to live our lives. Yes, we don't bring actual blood animal sacrifices, but we are bringing sacrifices before him day in and day out, with our mind, with our thoughts, with our actions, with our words, with all the things that involve representing the king. That is a form of sacrifice, and to include the Messiah himself. He is our sacrifice, and he is being sacrificed for us. His blood was sacrificed and shed for us, and so we have to enter in and redeem that blood in the manner that God ordains for us, not in just any which way, not in just any manner that we decide is good for us. We have to do it in a way that is acceptable, and that's what he's saying, is do it in a manner that will be accepted. Okay, he says in verse 9, he says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not fully reap the corner of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Okay, it's very important. There's this principle is a principle that should be something that we build our businesses on from the very beginning. We have a whole teaching that we do that talks about the creation process and the 7 days of creation, and how it is a pattern for us and how to build our businesses. And so once that business is up and running, this section, this week's Torah portion, directly connects with how to run our business and what we should do with the profits and what we should do with the earnings and how we should deal with our employees and how we should deal with our customers. All of this is very well rooted in this week's Torah portion of not gleaning the corners of our field. One of the biggest mistakes that most business owners do nowadays is they want to take profits out of their business as fast as possible. They get a business up and running, they register a company, they begin to go out there and work, and by month 3, month 6, year 1, they're already wanting to reap of the profits of their business, instead of allowing those profits to be reinvested and be used in a way that will actually bring sustained profits, sustain fruit of the land. We pull out of it now, and many people would take as much profit out of it as possible, and this is the wrong pattern. This is the way that we end up in trouble. This is the way we end up with not enough capital to fund our businesses. This is the way that we don't follow the way that God has given us, and thereby we suffer the consequences. Our businesses suffer the consequences. So if you're in business, you know someone that's in business, you're thinking of having a business, you really need to consider this pattern that God has given us of when you go into the land, you don't reap the fruit of the harvest right away. You have to wait. You have to allow that land to produce, and don't reap it. And when you do reap it, you leave the corners. All right, you leave the corners of your field. Now, this concept of leaving the corners and reaping, first of all, we need to establish that the process of working and reaping is actually a holy act. Going to work, establishing a business, being successful is actually a holy act of God that he says from the very beginning, this is one of the many ways that you are going to establish holiness, and you are going to be holy and represent holiness among the nations. This is something that's big time abused. The concept of tithes, the concept of leaving the corners, and all these things are greatly abused in this day and age's culture by pastors, by many Messianics, by Hebrew roots, by Christians, by evangelists, by prophets, by missionaries, by all these titles, apostles, bishops, all of these titles out there that say, well, now I work for the kingdom, and so I need to be supported. Actually goes against how many of our sages that went before us, many of the Talmudic sages even, were very ambitious in business. Many of them, most of them actually, according to most historical resources, are proven that they actually had their own businesses. They were actually independently wealthy. We see Paul himself sustains himself, and he takes care of his own costs. He takes care of his own supplies for food and travel and everything else in his day. Him being a tent maker, and however you want to translate that, there's many different ideas and many ways to spin that that people use to spin. He followed the pattern of giving, not taking, giving. And way too many people in our day and age that are running around with the word of God supposedly in their mouth are taking from the people. And the whole concept of being successful and having riches and growing was in order to show holiness. Now, how do we do that? We do that by something very important, and that's our field, right? So this field that we build, right? My marker's kind of going out a little bit. This field that we build, hopefully you can see this, he says not to glean, or not to harvest the corners of the field. Now, many of you might be looking at this and say that this is a square, or maybe a rectangle, and this is not. This is actually a picture of a heart. Just like we draw nowadays, we draw a heart kind of like this. Sorry, it's a bad heart. Not a good artist. I'm a teacher, not an artist. So we draw a heart this way. This is actually what your heart looks like. Not so much like this, like this. This is how God sees your heart. And how he measures your heart is by the corners of your field. And the corners of your field are your generosity. The corners of your field is the intent of your heart. Intent trumps everything. Intent is what God looks at before anything else, before whatever outward appearance of holiness that you have. He's always looking at the heart first. And so what this looks like is this. The scripture in this week's Torah portion says, do not reap the corners of your harvest, right? So the question is, how big are the corners? My corners could be all different sizes. I could say, well, that's the corner of my field. And so I'm going to leave that for the poor and the widow and the needy. I'm going to leave that corner right there, right? I'm going to leave that size corner. Or maybe I'm a little more generous and I say, well, this is my corner, right? I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Maybe that's your corner that you're actually giving. But maybe God's testing you and he's saying, well, I want to see, can you really give? So maybe you can make your corner a little bigger, right? Maybe you can make it a little bigger. And what it really boils down to is, how big are your corners? Because that corner can get really, really big, really quick, to where you're left with just a little bit in the middle. This is the test that God's giving us. Because it's a test to see, are we going to hold back? Or are we going to take what he has given us, the gifts that he has given us, the talents he has given us, the work he has given us, the wealth that he has given us, and are we going to reinvest it back into the kingdom? Are we going to grow? Because he doesn't frown on success. He doesn't frown on wealth. Money, again, he establishes this and opens up this week's Torah portion with, this is a holy thing, guys. He says, be holy for I am holy. And he begins to give us information. He begins to give us commandments, instructions on how to make this a holy thing. So what ends up happening is your goal of gleaning your field should become something that says, you know what? I want to give more. So I want my business to be more successful. I want to be able to grow my business. I want to have more employees. I want to have more revenues. Why? So my corners can be bigger. So that way, instead of having to just give a little bit because I can only give that much, maybe my corner can be even bigger. So instead, I double my field, right? He always talks about being fruitful and multiplying. He says, go out, subdue the earth, right? I give more. So now my corners are no longer there, or I can give double the corners. I've got that much more that I can give away to people, right? Which shows the intent of my heart. This is something that is so very important for us to understand is, don't pull the profits out of your companies. Don't sit back and expect God to do it all for you. We are given the God-given gifts and talents and understandings in a back, or whatever it might be, strength that he has given us to go out and work. See it as what it is, as a holy thing. You should want to work that overtime. You should want to be able to extend your hours. You should want to be able to work more so that you can acquire more, so that you can give more. Because at the end of the day, the focus are the corners of the field, right? The gleanings that are left behind, so that the world can see a just and righteous people that are around us, not one that is stingy and holding back. So I pray that this concept really blesses you and it provokes you. Again, I believe this is something that has been greatly abused amongst the believers, and it's one why I believe that each one of those out there that are teachers, that are leaders, if you have the ability, if it's at all possible for you to be able to do your part in investing into the kingdom, not just by teachings, because I know that's an investment, but we're also called to take care of the orphans, the needy, the widowed, and we do that by collectively working together and taking the corners of our field. We ask this question all the time. We look at our corners. We'll give you a last example before we go. I've heard countless people, do I give 10% before the tithe or before taxes or after taxes? When do I give it? How much do I give it? What about on refunds? And what about all these questions of what if and how much? And should it be 10% or should it be more? Do I only give 10% or do I give 20% or do I give 15 or 18 or how much do I give? And I think that question is the root of, it's not about a specific number. It's about, are you willing to sacrifice the corners of your field? And are you willing to how are you defining those corners? How far in, how deep are you willing to dig? How deep are you willing to get? How uncomfortable are you willing to give in your giving to prove to God that what's most important are those that are most important to Him, and what's most important to Him, which is holiness. Take care of the orphans, the widows, the needies, those that are around us that need to be cared for. So do things with excellence, do things with growth in mind. Plan your vision out so that you can do more in the community and show how righteous our God is. I bless you. I pray you have an awesome week, and I pray this has blessed you. If you have any questions in regards to this, feel free to email us, torahbits@gmail.com, torahbits@gmail.com. Ask questions in the comments fields below, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Torah Tuesday.